This is Unit 3.5, the early civil rights movement. We just got done discussing Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, the country was being put back together politically, and also the question was being asked, what we're going to do with all the former slaves. And so trying to give former slaves political equality. Well, as you know, African Americans really didn't get that political equality after Reconstruction came to an end. So in this unit, we're going to talk about how different African Americans responded to those restrictions that were imposed in that post-Reconstruction period. Remember, that'd be like literacy tests and poll taxes and Jim Crow laws. And we're going to talk about the leadership of three people specifically: Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, and Ida Wells Barnett. Remember, African Americans did not receive the full rights of citizenship after Reconstruction because of literacy tests, poll taxes, and Jim Crow laws. The literacy tests and poll taxes took away the 15th Amendment, which gave suffrage to African Americans, all African American men. And then the Jim Crow laws took away the 14th Amendment, which was supposed to give African Americans citizenship rights. African American leaders started emerging. The three that we talked about are probably the most famous and the most important to our class, at least: Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, and Ida Wells Barnett. Each of those had like different strategies to achieve that goal, and you're really going to need to pay attention, and I'm going to try to highlight some things that are really, really important that you definitely need to know in class. So we're going to start with Booker T. Washington. He was born a slave, and he raised himself to a position of leadership through his hard work and determination to receive an education. So that's going to shape his beliefs going forward. He's going to kind of believe that in a gradual approach, that if African Americans work hard and they keep working hard and they take like whatever jobs are given to them, then they can eventually progress. He's going to favor what's called a vocational education for African Americans. That means, you need to underline this somewhere, vocational education. It's very important. Vocational education means like a skill-based job, like electrician or plumber or carpenter. This is not, so basically like kind of like lower skilled jobs as opposed to like higher skill. Like, he's not advocating that African Americans become doctors or lawyers or anything like that. He actually founded the Tuskegee Institute to help give vocational training to African Americans. And he really wants full equality for African Americans, but he knows that if African Americans were too assertive, then they might get lynched. Because remember, he is from the South, so he knows how African Americans are treated in the South. His public statement suggests that he's willing to accept second-class citizenship for African Americans in exchange for jobs. And because if African Americans get jobs, then that can alleviate some of the poverty. He gave a speech called the Atlanta Compromise, in which he pleaded with textile mill owners to hire African Americans. However, they really don't get a lot of the jobs. None of those jobs are really forthcoming. He's known as a gradualist, and he is more accepted by whites in the country than any of the other two, because he favors gradually giving African Americans more and more rights. Southern African Americans revered Washington, but Northern African Americans criticized him because he was too gradual in their opinion. So that's one approach, Booker T. Washington. The thing to really know is vocational education and that he's a gradualist. The next is W.B. Du Bois. W.B. Du Bois was born free in the North, and he earned a PhD from Harvard. So that kind of shapes his beliefs, just like Booker T. Washington being born a slave shaped his beliefs. He argued that all African Americans should have the opportunity for any education that fit their talent. He promotes the idea of the talented tenth, which would give well-educated African American leaders. So basically, if you're smart enough to become a doctor, then you should become a doctor. It doesn't matter about your race. If you're smart enough to be a lawyer, then you should be able to become a lawyer. He really opposes Washington's gradualist strategy, and he actually starts the NAACP. One of the most famous publications of the NAACP at that time was The Crisis, which he edited. He ends up becoming more and more militant, or his voice is more militant than Booker T. Washington, and that's going to energize his readers, which are the growing African American middle class, specifically in the North. It'd be many years, though, before that NAACP would be successful in protecting African Americans' rights in court. That's not really going to be until Brown versus Board in the 1950s. And that's what's going to launch the modern civil rights movement, Brown versus Board. So NAACP isn't initially important, but it will be later. Still in the North, they had the last hire. African Americans were the last hired and the first fired, and there was still that de facto segregation, which means by practice, in the North, and then de jure segregation, which is by law in the South. he's really not as accepted by white Americans as Washington is, because he isn't as gradual. He wants things to change quickly. The biggest thing to know about him is he thinks that all African Americans should have the opportunity for any education that fit their talent. That's the talented 10th idea. So if you're smart enough to become a doctor, then you should become a doctor. He doesn't believe in the idea of vocational education like Booker T. Washington does. Ida Wells Barnett. She was born a slave in Mississippi just prior to emancipation. She was actually educated in a freedom school. And so that kind of shapes her beliefs going forward. She's a teacher and a writer. At one point, she's actually forced to sit in a segregated railroad car. She was forcibly removed from a white railroad car and put into the African-American section of the railroad car. And so she sues about it. She's going to start writing articles against segregation, and that's actually going to get her fired from her teaching job. One of the things that really shapes her is that one of her friends is lynched or was lynched in Memphis. And so that's going to start her on an anti-lynching crusade. She really is going to push Congress to try to pass anti-lynching laws. And her criticisms of lynching are actually going to meet with violent reactions from whites. She really doesn't like Booker T. Washington's strategy of accommodation. And think about that. The reason she didn't is because of what she experienced growing up in the South and the lynching of her friend. She is a founding member of the NAACP, but she's actually going to leave when the group was not militant enough. And she's really not successful at getting anti-lynching laws passed, but she does raise awareness of the conditions of African Americans on both the national and international levels. So she helps bring attention to the fact that African Americans are being lynched in the South and being grossly mistreated. So what you see by all three of these are all three of them have different approaches. Booker T. Washington is very gradual. W.E. Du Bois is kind of more in the middle. And then Ida Wells Barnett is probably a little more radical than those two. And they're shaped by what they went through in life. And so I think the thing to really understand is that Booker T. Washington favored a vocational education and accommodation and more of a gradual approach, while W.B. Du Bois favors a talented tent strategy, which means if you're smart enough to go be a doctor, you should become a doctor. And then Ida Wells Barnett is probably the most militant of them, and she really is pushing for anti-lynching laws. That sums up 3.5. You are going to work a little bit more on this in class. Please go to Canvas to turn in the notes guide and take the video quiz, and make sure you write your name on it as well in ink. Thank you very much for watching.